Top of the morning to you, mates. Tekking101 here to wish you a very happy St. Patrick's Day. And what better way to celebrate this great green holiday of old than by talking about a German motive guy with a Jewish-sounding name. Okay, first off, I apologize to the great island of Ireland, or the land of Scotland, or whatever accent I was probably butchering just now. But anyway, yeah, so this is going to be a Yhwach discussion video about this guy right here, the main villain of the current arc of the Bleach series, the 1,000-year Blood War arc, or 1,000-year Holy War arc, however you want to say it. He's been the main villain for, I've been established as the main villain for about 2.5 years now, and Kubo has really been doing a pretty good job and keeping him in mystery while as sprinkling like a little bit of backstory on him like every so often. Usually in the middle between fights, like you'll have the big epic fights with, you know, for example, like Maste Masculine versus Renji and, you know, Kensei and Rose, and then after that fight we get a little bit more about him, and then, you know, cuts back to other fights, and that's probably the trend he's continuing, but we still don't know very much about him, particularly in who or what he is, where he came from, and his connection with the Quincy's, his connection with possibly the rest of the Soul Society at large, where a lot of their powers come from, like where the shadow thing happens. So I've compiled a list of pretty much all the stuff we do currently know about Yhwach that has been established. So this is basically just going to be a massive speculation video. I'm going to do it in sections. I'm going to go back to the earliest point that we know about Yhwach, and I'm just going to kind of expand it from there to current stuff that's currently happening in Bleach with the war. And it's, you know, it's open to opinion. It's open to my point of view. If you want to leave a comment below on exactly what you think about a certain thing that I'm going to talk about, go ahead. Maybe I'm viewing it from a different way. Maybe you view it somewhere else, and you can change my opinion on the matter. Like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. That could be what he's all about. But anyway, let's begin at the beginning, I suppose. The earliest point that we've ever learned about Yhwach. This is coming primarily from chapter 565, The Father of the Quincy's, The Origin Story. So what's been kind of a running gag, I should say, on my Bleach reviews is that every time I'm talking about Yhwach, I usually refer to him as the Quincy Jesus, because that's essentially what he is. He's basically the Christ figure from the other Sternritters. You know, he's not just their leader, he's also kind of their creator god, like Messiah archetype. So it's not really a far cry to call him that, but really from chapter 565, what we learned about him, he really kind of is closer to a demigod. I wasn't really far off when I was referring to him as a Christ figure. That's basically what he was. So when Yhwach was an infant, we don't exactly know how he came into the world, and I'll get to that in a second, but when he was an infant, he couldn't see, he couldn't hear, he couldn't taste, he couldn't smell, he couldn't pretty much do anything with the five senses, and all the people around him just writ him off as being dead, or he's going to die very shortly because this baby is very ill. But then it was discovered that whoever touched the infant Yhwach would later have their own wounds healed. Like, for example, someone that was an amputee and didn't have a leg. When they came in contact with Yhwach, their leg would be healed. And not just physical wounds. It was also stuff like, oh, I'm so depressed because my child died or something, and you touch the baby. It's like, oh, that hole in my heart has kind of been healed. I'm really feeling good. You know, oh, I'm so cowardly. I can't get over my cowardice. And, you know, touch Yhwach. He's like, oh, I'm the cowardly lion. I found my courage. You know, let's charge and kill the Lannisters. But that's basically what it was, though, and he was really regarded as kind of like a miracle baby, essentially, that you touch this baby and you get, you know, your miracle granted or whatever. What was actually happening, though, was that Yhwach, as an infant, was unconsciously dividing out his soul to these individuals. So problems that couldn't be solved with just one soul was handled with two. And the drawback of this, for the people that were granted their miracles anyway, is that, number one, they happened to die very shortly after their miracles were being granted. So when, you know, the guy charges in to kill the Lannisters, he gets mowed down. And then what happens after they die, though, is that the power or the soul fragment that was sent to the baby, that was sent from the baby, goes back to the infant Yhwach, as well as the soul of the person that died. So Yhwach slowly began to recuperate and recover his powers. So right here, we got like a baby that was born of mythical proportions. Like, this guy clearly does, this baby just clearly cannot abide by the common laws of physics. So my idea how he was born is, this is going to go off on a limb here, but I'm just going to throw this out here, is the connection to the Soul King in some way. And the Soul King has also been kind of an area of speculation exactly what he is, but we're not going to go into that here. Maybe that'll be a separate video on what he exactly is. The Soul King is probably the closest thing to an actual god we have in this series. Like, okay, you could be saying like, oh, Shinigami are death gods. Yeah, but they could still die. Okay, you're not much of a god if you can die. Like, the closest thing we've gotten to actually immortal creatures in this series that just cannot die no matter what you do to them are Aizen, but that was through, manufactured means. He kind of had to manufacture his own immortality, but the only pure immortal beings that we've seen so far are the Soul King, and Yhwach, because Yhwach, what we're going to get into later, basically, even if you can kill him, you really can't, because he's going to come back. So, my idea for his existence is that when the Soul King was brought into existence, and we're talking like hundreds of thousands of years ago possibly, when he was brought into existence, maybe like a shadow or a reverse side of the coin was spawned by Yhwach, because there's always like an opposite end of the spectrum here. You can't have a god without having a devil. You know, that's just how it goes. There has to be a balance of good and evil here. So, if the Soul King came into existence, and through him spawned the Shinigami and the Soul Society and the Soul Palace and all that stuff, and in opposite ends of the spectrum, maybe it spawned this shadow world where Yhwach would lead over. Now, when we see the past with Yhwach and all these people around it, we don't really get an exact date of when this is. We don't exactly get like a clear picture of who these people are. It obviously happened more than 1,000 years ago for what Yamamoto had, dealings with Yhwach, but he was obviously around way before that. Like, we're talking like this guy could have been around for easily several millennia. We don't exactly know how fast he grows either. You know, right now he appears like to be about in his late 30s, early 40s. We don't know if it's like it takes him a longer time to grow and age like a normal person, or if it's like a vampire, like you grow, super accelerated to a certain age and then you stop at that age. Could have been something like that. Basically my thoughts on an origin of this man, exactly where he came from and how he was, sought as basically a miracle giver to anyone that needed it. That's how he, came into existence here. And that also sets a crutch up for exactly what his Quincy's are. So Yhwach is the leader of the Quincy's, and from what we found out from Ichigo, with the idea of Zangetsu being inside, Ichigo's soul, all Quincy's, even if they're impure or not, or even if they're unaware of it, like Ichigo's case, they still got a miniature Yhwach just chilling out in their souls, because that's the very essence of Quincy power. Quincy power all came from Yhwach. He's kind of like Abraham, if everybody, eventually traces their roots back far enough, you would supposedly get to Abraham. That's just how it goes with Yhwach, essentially. You get back to a certain point, and he spawned all the Quincy's beyond him. Now, this goes back to the whole idea of him dividing out his soul to different individuals. Now, from what I can assume, though, is what happened with the modern Quincy's, of how the Quincy's came to birth. Because remember, when we learned about his origin, his origin story with being a baby, we didn't really talk about, him separating his powers out and, like, bestowing the power upon them, to become Quincy's and, like, amass his own little group. He was kind of just on his own back then. What I think happened with the Quincy race that exists currently is the battle with Yamamoto 1,000 years ago. I think this is where that comes into play. I think that for some reason Yhwach has been around for thousands of years at this point, and he began dividing out specific portions of his soul, and he created a version of the Sternritter 1,000 years ago to combat Yamamoto's force. Why did they do this? Well, I think back then Yamamoto basically sought Yhwach as the one main threat of the Soul Society. You had to kill this guy, because otherwise it would throw the balance out of whack. You know how the Quincy's now are killing Hollows, and that threw the balance out of whack, and that could end the world. Maybe something very similar, maybe a greater threat happened 1,000 years ago. That's honestly kind of vague. I really hope we get a backstory to that battle 1,000 years ago from Yhwach's perspective to kind of fill everything in. We got a little bit from Yama's perspective, but not really. But if we look at that, Yhwach, Yamamoto in the original Goatee 13, Yhwach had to amass his own army. So maybe this is where the ancestors of the Quincy's at a race came through. He got the idea of dividing out his power specifically to creating the race of Quincy's. They can gather in Reishi and fight against the Shinigami. Makes a lot of sense considering that the Shinigami exist in a world of Reishi. This is the best way for you to combat them, is to create soldiers that can use their strength as your strength to manufacture a weakness there. Now, when Mayuri was talking about this to Yamamoto, when the threat became aware that, okay, the enemies are Quincy's, Mayuri said, "This is all your fault, Yamamoto, because you failed to kill that man 1,000 years ago." Now, what I took from that was not that Yamamoto failed to kill Yhwach 1,000 years ago, it's just that he couldn't. Going back to the whole immortal guy thing, I'm fairly certain, using Yamamoto's full brunt of his powers with his Bankai and everything, because he said he used his Bankai against Yhwach 1,000 years ago, he just didn't use his full extent of the ability, but he still used his Bankai. I'm pretty sure Yama would not have stopped until he completely burnt Yhwach into, like, crispy bacon, like ash on the ground. I'm pretty sure Yhwach back then, considering how ruthless he was, along with all the other members of the Goatee back then that were very ruthless, Unohana being one of them, he wouldn't have just, like, stabbed Yhwach in the ground, fallen, and he's, bleeding out, and Yama's just like, "I'll let you live." No, Yama would have not have stopped until he thought he was dead. But it's not that he didn't kill him, it's just that he couldn't. Yhwach is basically immortal in the sense that even if you kill him, he has a ritual or a means of coming back one day eventually. Now, this also has been massively speculated exactly how this system works, but basically here's the gist of it. It takes about 1,000 years for Yhwach to completely regain his form. Like, let's say he was completely obliterated by Yamamoto. Like, on a molecular level, he was turned into ash, and the ash was turned into ash. Okay, that was Yhwach Bach. Okay, coming back from that, it took him 900 years to just regain his body, and then another 90 years to regain his intelligence, and 9 years to regain his power, and then 9 days as the addendum to conquer the world. So, with that all in mind, we could maybe assume that that's not the first time that's happened. Maybe it's happened before his fight with Yamamoto. Thousands of years beforehand, people have tried to kill this guy, and he just comes back in the same way, as like the creator god that he is, essentially. Maybe the only way for him to die is for the Soul King to die as well, and just throw the entire circuit of everything out of whack, and then everybody dies. That's getting kind of metaphysical there, so I'm not going to discuss that there. But that's my opinion for the battle 1,000 years ago, that Yamamoto had this big epic battle, and Yhwach created the Quincy's, add the Stern Ritter in order to continue on with his legacy. Maybe Yamamoto completely obliterated Yhwach back then. Maybe the Quincy's were still around, and that's kind of how their lineage continued throughout the 1,000 years, because the Shinigami and the Quincy's have been in this conflict for several hundred years. I think it was said like 200 years ago they were apparently wiped out in that massive extinction. That's still like 1,000 years ago, 200 years ago. That's still 800 years of void there where the Quincy's clearly existed, but Yhwach did not. So that's my opinion on what happened with that. So now we get to the present. We get to the current fight that's been going on in the 1,000 Years Blood War arc. Yhwach is now almost completely resurrected. He has his form, he has his intelligence, and he has his power. The only thing this guy's waiting on right now is for those 9 days to rock on by and for him to conquer the entire Soul Society, and basically, we don't even know what his full final goal is. That's the weird thing. We don't know what his goal is. At least Aizen, at the beginning of the Aranka arc, we learned about Aizen. He wants to create the Oaken, he wants to kill the Soul King, he wants to kill the Ryo. Like, okay, at least we have an objective for the guy. Yhwach, we have absolutely no idea. He stated he wants to conquer the Shinigami. He wants to purge them all. Alright, that's all well and good, but what do you want to do after that? Does that include the Soul King? Does that not include the Soul King? Do you want to just wipe out all the Shinigami and just roll over the Soul Society as your domain? Here's where the Shadow thing comes into play. The Shadow World, it doesn't take very hard to understand this, considering what we've seen from it so far, is that the Shadow World is a reverse spectrum of the Soul Society, or in that it's a pocket dimension of the Soul Society. Let's just call it that. It can flip and switch depending on, Yhwach's will, essentially. He can do whatever he wants with it. It's, because he was able to flip the entire, Von and Reich City over the Soul Society. He didn't bother with the Seki Stone or that barrier or anything. He could just flip it. And he got his soldiers in the middle of the Soul Society like that using this Shadow Dimension world. This is going back to, this is where the relation to the Soul King lies. If Yhwach is truly like an opposite spectrum of the Soul King, this would make perfect sense. Soul King is the light, Yhwach is the shadow, and he controls this other dimension that's on a parallel plane to the Soul Society. Makes a lot of sense in my opinion there. it also makes a lot of sense why he's kind of connected to it. When he was invading the Soul Society for the first time, when he was, fighting against Ichigo, he was about to deliver the killing blow, and he got pulled back into the Shadow Dimension because he couldn't stay out of it for very long. I'm thinking he just did that because he didn't want his own place to get wrecked. When he fought against Yamamoto, he knew during the first invasion, I'm going to kill Yama, so, they get wiped out, and their morale gets shot, and I can just finish off this threat right here. I don't want my own place to get busted when he uses Bankai. That's why he waited until the second invasion to actually use his Vondenreich city, make the Vondente. I'm sure he could have done that the first invasion if he wanted to, but he just didn't for that reason. So, he's connected to this Shadow Dimension in some way, just how the Soul King is probably connected to the Soul Palace, or his special zone in some way. I can't imagine the Soul King just like descending from on high, through the entire Soul Society and just be like, wow, you guys are seriously fucked down here. Click. There's a reason he stays up there in his weird cocoon place, okay? And another connection here, it actually just dawned on me in the past, like while I was writing this video, while I was jotting down everything in order to come up with this video concept, is the connection where Aizen comes to play in all this. Now, Kubo said Aizen's story's not done yet, he's still going to appear, and there's always been a bunch of thoughts, Aizen's going to come back, and he's going to be, he's going to be an ally to the Shinigami, and he's going to fight with the Shinigami to defeat the Quincy's or something along those lines. He's going to be reformed. Here's what my new theory is. He did not go down there he did not go through all the trouble of sending Royd on Yamamoto and distracting him and going down to the prison just to get Aizen to kind of join him. I think he wanted to see Aizen because Aizen was the closest thing to becoming, like I said, manufacturing immortality, to becoming close to the Soul King. I think that's why he wanted him. I mean, he told Yamamoto I wanted to see him on becoming a war potential, but I think he wanted to discuss something involving the Soul King with Aizen because Aizen came very close to becoming something very similar to the Soul King, or he's immortal now. I mean, essentially, he is immortal. I mean, I guess that's where they couldn't kill him, so I guess he kind of still has that power a little bit. And then Aizen, distorted his view of time, and that's like the only guy so far that's been seen to actually mess with Yhwach in any real way. Don't you think that's a little strange? Even Yamamoto, like the guy was able to absorb Yamamoto's Bankai using that Medallize ability. That's a pretty big freaking, nugget you're stashing away there. You can't just like normally do that, So he was able to disable the Captain Commander like freaking cake, and it's Aizen, the only one that really got the jump on him there. I mean, Ichigo managed to wound him a little bit, but, that was on, that wasn't really that huge. He was like genuinely surprised, like, holy shit, Aizen like messed with my view of reality there. That does not seem like something that could easily just, the dude can easily be manipulated by a simple hypnosis trick, okay? Aizen might have the potential to actually hurt this or kill this guy, or maybe get rid of him for good. Like I said, this is going to be a battle of immortal creatures more so than just hit him a lot of times until he's gone, like probably what Yamamoto did 1,000 years ago. The last thing I want to discuss here is Uryu's connection to all this, because this is still, like, we don't even know why Uryu's there. That's probably another video altogether on why Uryu's in the Vondenreich. Though, what Hashwalth apparently told Uryu was that, the Majesty wants his body in order to maybe transcend his bindings, like maybe he's connected to the Shadow Realm, I guess I can call it. Maybe through some kind of Orochimaru body stealing process, he can gain Uryu, and maybe before even Uryu was born, he was like predisposed for this, like hundreds of or thousands of years ago, Yhwach set into motion Uryu's birth over a series of several generations to breed like the perfect Quincy or the perfect vessel for him to inhabit. Because from what we've seen in the series, I can't imagine he just picked Uryu out of a hat. If that's the case, why not Ryukin? Or something like that. I think Yhwach maybe set it out for, maybe like exactly as planned, like Aizen, like 100 years in the process. He planned on Katagiri, he planned on Ryukin, planned on breeding like this perfect vessel for himself, and that's what Uryu is going to be, according to Hashwalth anyway. Hashwalth is another thing too, because apparently him and Yhwach have like a split personality deal going on here. I was going to talk a little bit about that, of how Yhwach maybe has like a split personality thing, kind of like Sensui from Yu Yu Hakusho, how Sensui committed all these horrible acts, so in order to stay pure of heart, he actually divided his personality. Kind of something similar with Yhwach here, where, you know, during the day, Yhwach is a bloodthirsty ruler, but then you have Hashwolf going around saying, oh, His Majesty loves peace. He's the father of us all. He's our Christ figure. And during the night when he sleeps, their personalities kind of swap, and Hashwolf becomes the ruler, and Yhwach becomes the, you know, the father of the Quincy's again. Maybe that's something like that, where in order to stay pure in his guidance, Yhwach divided his personalities as well as his soul in order to maintain this kind of this mentality he's gained. That's basically my connection, because he's connected to all Quincy's, but his connection to Hashwolf is like much more adamant, much more to be able to be elaborated upon than just his connection to some random Stern Ritter. Okay, there's clearly something around here with him and B, you know, A and B. That's, you know, just very clear right there. But, you know, that's all the stuff I really want to discuss here. I'm sure that's enough information for you guys to go crazy with speculation and opinion. Comment section below on what exactly you think Kubo's going to want to do with Yhwach, exactly where he came from, what his final endgame goal is, what he wants with the rest of the Soul Society, what he wants with the Soul King, what he wants with Aiz, and what he wants with Ichigo and Uryu, and, you know, where this is going to go from. I got to give Kubo some credit, you know. It's been 2.5 years. He's still a mystery. He's still kind of like the no BS kind of guy. He's still shown to be insanely stronger, and it's more of just kind of like a futility at this point. Like, this guy, he's on a way different level of any other villain that you've ever faced. You know, this guy transcends, like, you talk about Aizen transcending Hall and Shinigami, this guy is something completely different. You know, this guy is like on Soul King level, or if not, just like one tier below it. You know, it's like comparing, you know, Madara Uchiha to the Sage of Six Paths. If he's not the same, he's like one level below. You know, that's the closest thing I have there. So, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you'll comment below, most certainly. Tekking101, happy St. Patrick's Day to all. Signing out there, mates.